Well, and I think that also leads us to a recent report that just came out last week, and it was funded by the National Science Foundation, looking at 70 countries and laws against violence against women, and where there have been real successes, where there have been enduring policy changes that have been stable in countries. They've seen that is from a strong role of the civil society in those countries that's brought about that change, which leads a little bit to the initiative you're doing at the Council on Foreign Relations, and I think the work of Hillary Clinton. And I think it takes us to the next 4 years of U.S. foreign policy, and what kind of influence can we play in making sure that we strengthen women's organizations in the Middle East?
Well, these changes really come from within these countries. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I mean, Secretary Clinton has drawn attention to these issues. She has been doing that for a very long time in her role as First Lady and leading the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Conference in 1995. And then, of course, as Secretary of State and in creating a special office within the State Department and at the ambassador level for global women's issues, something that President Obama has just signed into law to make a permanent office. Mm-hmm. These things help keep attention on these issues. The fact that she's given a platform to many women leaders to talk about their struggle for greater rights and greater equality, the fact that she meets with civil society leaders when she travels overseas, all of these things are, I think, helpful, but ultimately these changes are going to come from within these societies. And the issue we were talking about, tackling violence against women, well, you know, many countries have laws on the books that simply aren't enforced. And the changes have to come when men and women stand up and say, you know, we're going to change attitudes, we're going to change cultural attitudes, we're going to change societal norms on these issues. And that's a very convoluted, long process. But it's bringing discussion of these issues out into the open, just issues that have long been taboo. It's not like they didn't happen. It's not like girls haven't been killed through honor killings for generations in a country like Pakistan. But today it's being talked about, and it's being exposed in film. It's being talked about on television, in talk shows, in soap operas. I mean, this is a very powerful medium where it brings discussion and debate into people's living rooms about these very real issues, and you're seeing soap operas across the region have an enormous impact.
Yes, they do, and soap operas, which is interesting because people will talk about that in India as well, that soap operas Absolutely. Have actually changed women's lives. Mm-hmm. Because they can go home and watch a changing role for women that might not be the actual reality of their own lives.
That's right.
So it's a new medium, which gets back to the social media. Mm-hmm. And you know, do you, in looking at what's happening in Iran and even what's happening in Pakistan and the changes of women's involvement and using the internet, communicating on the internet, and I know a number of women's organizations that give computers and cell phones as tools to women mm-hmm. to be their own journalists around the world and to tell the stories in their own way, with their own words about their own lives, that it actually is changing the ground rules for the democracy and changing governance. Mm-hmm. And do you see this being a positive for women, using this tool?
Look, social media is a mixed bag. You have, I think all of these things you've mentioned are true in some ways, that women are using social media as a voice that they haven't had in the past. They're able to engage with other women, they're able to engage with organizations that are working on these issues, they're able to read and understand more what's going on outside their immediate community. They're really participating in an unprecedented fashion through social media, you know, in their pajamas at home. You know, you can do that, which is empowering, because mm-hmm. in these societies it's very still difficult in many cases for women to be outside of their home on their own. So this is a way to engage. And you've got numerous examples of women leaders who've used social media to build a very remarkable platform of change by getting people together through Facebook. I mean, you know, women all around the region who have been engaging in this way. But you also see social media being used by the conservatives in a very effective way. I mean, some of the most conservative voices have taken to social media in a huge way. Very conservative critics, clerics in Saudi Arabia who are critical of a changing role for women. I mean, they have millions of followers on Twitter. You know, they denounce modernity, but they do it using social media. They have no problem with social media. You know, they look, the Taliban in Afghanistan, this is a group that really wants to live in the 7th century, and yet they all have cell phones.
Yes.
And they don't blow up the cell phone towers because they're hugely dependent on it.
Right.
So you see social media being used by conservatives and progressives, but net, I think that social media is transformative for women. And I look at a country like Saudi Arabia, where you look at the campaign of women to drive, and the struggle that women have had there to get their side of the story out. And women did put on a driving demonstration in Saudi Arabia back in 1990. About 40 women took to their cars, drove around Riyadh, and for 24 hours were cheered as heroes among their group of family members and others who had supported them. But very quickly, the government took control of that narrative and labeled them as Zionist spies and prostitutes and working for the CIA, and completely discredited these women, took away their passports, fired them from their government jobs. Really discredited them. You can't label these women as Zionist spies and working for the CIA or undermining the morals of the country, because there beside them is their father or brother or husband beaming with pride that these women are doing this. And you can see they look just like you and me. Well, maybe not you and me, but for Saudi women, they'd say, you know, these are not subversives. These are just average Saudi women. And why shouldn't they be able to drive? And so you've seen on social media discussion of these topics happening really in an unprecedented fashion.
Right. And moving so much faster than the ruling parties and dictators can keep up with, which challenges that they struggle to keep up, which leads really to the first discussion we're having around violence against women and using the social media, and the most recent example of this 1 billion rising. And I don't think it was 1 billion yet, but that's the goal, that on February 14th, women around the world will dance, do whatever they want to do on February 14th to draw attention to the 1 billion women who are sexually assaulted around the world every year. So it's a movement that I think you're right, will not change. It will only grow. How the other forces deal with it and where the conflict will arise in the cyberspace, I don't know.
Well, you know, these things don't happen easily. You know, you look at our own history in this country, and it has been and continues to be a long struggle for women. If you think about rape in the United States, I mean, if you were a woman who was raped, you didn't go to the police because it was too shameful, because you had little belief that the police would actually do anything. You would be labeled somehow responsible. You asked for it. You know. Yes, it was. You know, it was. What you wore, all of these things, and you see this going on today in the Middle East. I mean, today in these women who were sexually assaulted in Tahrir Square. I mean, just this week you've had members of the Muslim Brotherhood standing up and saying, well, the women asked for it. Look how they're dressed. You know, they shouldn't be out there. They shouldn't be near the men. But the difference today is that those voices are not uncontested. You have other people challenging them back, saying, no, that's not right. And you have women taking their cases to court. I mean, breaking that barrier of shame, breaking that barrier of fear is the first step. And you see it happening across the region.
Well, certainly we did in Delhi, where men were marching with women. And I think that one of the most exciting parts of the 1 billion rising effort that was last week, February 14th, was the number of young men that joined with the women in rising up and protesting along with them. Well, thank you very much for joining us in Denver.
Thank you for having me.
I hope your trip goes well, and we look forward to reading the updates on the book. And so just to review again, Paradise Beneath Her Feet, Women Transforming the Middle East, is dealing with women in Iran and Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt.
Saudi Arabia and Iraq.